Thank you. Thanks so much for the, oh, thank you. Absolutely. Thanks so much for the wonderful framing. Well, it is my great pleasure then. I'm going to introduce our first panel, and I'm going to introduce all four and then have them come join me for a really wonderful session here on stage. First, Professor Caitlin Mueller. She's the Associate Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering and Associate Professor of Architecture. Caitlin is an amazing designer, engineer, scientist, architect who I've known ever since her undergraduate MIT experience. So I have to start with the personal. She's an amazing student. We lived together in Baker House, one of the most beautiful architectural buildings on all of campus. So what an environment to learn and grow up in. She specializes in digital structural research group. She works at the creative interface of architecture, structural engineering, and computation. And she's focusing on computational design and digital fabrication methods to innovate, looking at high performance of buildings, buildings of the future, structures, and most importantly, to empower a more sustainable and equitable future. Can't wait to hear more from her. Next, we're going to have Zach Lieberman, and he's our adjunct associate professor here in Media Arts and Sciences. Zach's an artist, researcher, educator. He has a simple goal, which I love. He wants you all to be surprised, and I think he'll accomplish that. In his work, he creates performances and installations that take human gestures as input, amplifying them in all kinds of different ways. He makes drawings come to life. He imagines, what the voice might look like. Transforms people's silhouettes into music. He creates artwork through writing software. He's a co-creator of the open frameworks. He runs the Futures Sketches group here at the Media Lab. We have Michael Runningwolf joining us, who's a software engineer and founder of Flare. Michael is from the Northern Cheyenne, Lakota, and Blackfeet nations. He was raised in a rural prairie village in Montana, also my home state, in intermittent water and electricity. He has his master's of science in computer science. He's a former engineer at Amazon's Alexa, as well as a researcher at the Mueller AI Institute. He's researching Indigenous language and culture reclamation using immersive technologies, using AI. His work has been awarded an MIT Solve Fellowship, an Alfred P. Sloan Fellowship, a Patron McGovern AI for Humanity Prize, and I could list a lot more. It's through ethical application of AI and the advancement of technology, respecting Indigenous ways of knowing, that he's making such a huge contribution. I'd also like to introduce Caroline Runningwolf, nee Old Coyote. She's the co-founder of Flare. An amazing partner in life and impact. Caroline's a former business consultant, project manager, leading multinational teams. She's an enrolled member of the Apsaluki, hopefully I got that right, nation, the Crow Nation in Montana. Caroline is so interested in empowering everyone, lifting up, cultural acclamation. She's an artist. She was raised in the US, also Canada, and Germany. Multilingual, multinational, a global citizen of the world. Together, Caroline and Michael have founded the first language AI reality initiative. That's what Flare is for, and is housed at the Mueller Institute in Montreal. So they're developing the voice of AI to support Indigenous language reclamation, and you're going to hear a lot more. So please, can we welcome our four panelists? Yeah, go ahead and I'll do one more. So I've asked our panelists to be able to present a brief intro to their work so you get to know them even a little bit better. And then we're going to go into Q&A and get your questions ready as well, please. Great. I go first? Yeah. You have the clicker? Great.
All right, good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm Caitlin Mueller. I'm faculty here at MIT, and I'm really excited to present some of my research and some of my thoughts on how to connect AI to human and computer-driven design and architecture in the built environment. So my very short talk is called Learning and Exploring Spaces of Possibility in Creative Design. I do this work with my research group, Digital Structures, who are an interdisciplinary group of architects, engineers, mathematicians, computer scientists, who together are united in this mission to find new and better ways to design in the built environment. And this is a really hard problem. Designing buildings, although we've been doing it for millennia, remains really, really challenging. And just as one example, I have these images from the engineer Heinz Isler, the Swiss engineer, who in the 1950s was coming up with ideas for new shapes for structural shells, like Kresge Auditorium is an example of a structural shell. And he wrote this amazing paper where he revealed this infinite spectrum of possibility. That's what's so amazing about design, right? There's an infinite space to explore of possible solutions to a problem. And yet structural shells, like many types of buildings, have a huge amount of constraints. Not every amazing surface or shape that we can imagine actually works as an efficient structural shell whose thickness can be thinner than an eggshell proportionally. Many shapes are actually terrible shapes for structural shells, and Kresge is one of them, actually. Kresge is a super inefficient shell. And so how do we design it in this kind of strange universe where so many things are possible, but many things are actually really bad ideas? It's a really challenging task to face as humans. It's also hard to face as a computer. I call this space the design space, and this is an example from my own research, a little bit more of a boring structure, a truss than the shells, but same idea. By changing the shape of the structure of this truss, we change how much material is needed in the truss to support a given load, so it becomes more or less efficient based on how it looks. And I'm really fascinated by these types of problems where there's a relationship between how something performs, what its environmental impact is, how much it costs, and how it looks. And almost everything in the built environment has these types of relationships. The design space and this performance landscape across it allows us to start to understand and explore this wide, vast realm of possibility. There have been techniques available since around the 1950s, the same time as Heinz Isler, to find the very best solutions in this space, optimization. And today, we still hear a lot about optimization in the form of one-shot generative models, let's say. But I think that's really insufficient. We're never going to fully articulate what we care about in design, I think, into something a computer can understand. We'll see, but I continue to think that's not quite possible. And so the space itself of possibility is really important. We need to be able to compare and study and explore and be inspired by what it contains and not just have it give us a single answer. So my work is really about exploring these design spaces. This is an early tool that I built as a PhD student to try to explore some of these ideas. It's a tool that a human and computer collaborate through to design shaped trusses, to find more shapes for trusses. And the computer shows 10 diverse, high-performing designs to the designer. And the designer can see how the designs perform. There's a number, a lower number is better. It means it's a lighter weight structure. And then based on how they look, or based on whatever the human is interested in, they can select certain designs which then feed into new suggestions. And together, there's this co-creation process where the computer and the human are exploring the space together, not in a totally undirected way, in an efficient way where performance is considered, but also in a divergent way where new solutions are found collaboratively. And this type of approach is really interesting to me because it presents diversity in the options. I think diversity is so important in these types of approaches because what's the right design for me might not be the right design for someone else. Designing buildings, like many things, again, cannot be completely quantified. It's based on context, culture, perception, climate, space, context. These things are highly personal and really rely on human experience and human judgment. So diversity of solutions allows us to harness that knowledge and that judgment and inspire us to find better solutions. What do we do now that we have so many more powerful tools in our AI toolbox? How can we push these ideas further? I want to very quickly touch on 4 ideas that I've been working on in the last 10 years or so, using not only the very recent advances in AI, but the sort of longer trajectory of machine learning. One is the ability to understand performance instantaneously through approximations, AI-based approximations. The next is to actually learn better design spaces than we can construct by hand, to have better exploration. Next is to try to deal with real data. Almost all of my work uses synthetic data because the data available in the world isn't structured very well to deal with architectural modeling, but in the future it could be. And finally, starting to think about how to integrate natural forms of design intent into the process. So first is the most obvious, and so I think kind of fully commercialized at this point, this idea of surrogate modeling, where we can generate a lot of data and then build a predictive regression model to predict a scalar version of performance. So is this, how well does this design perform? Or even a distributed idea of performance. In this case, as we change the structure, we're getting a prediction of how the material should be optimally distributed within the domain, which is dependent on the shape. And this technique normally takes minutes or hours, but with machine learning can become real time, and it changes the game in terms of what we can consider as designers. Next is the idea that we can find meaningful directions or variables in the design space through data science and machine learning. So here, instead of taking a hand-parameterized problem, we're finding meaningful ways to change a structure to improve or change its performance. And that idea can be explored even more kind of in a more sophisticated way with recent generative models. So this is a conditional variational autoencoder that condenses a 36-variable hand-parameterized space into just 2 dimensions. The landscape again shows performance, higher is worse, and we can start to move through that space as humans, not only to optimize, but to explore, to find new solutions, to understand the continuity and the spaces between ideas we may have already had, and to discover new options that all perform well. That's what's really exciting to me. We're starting to do that also with broader sets of design spaces. So here, all the buildings in a city, let's say, we can start to learn a common representation across all of them so that we can explore even more diverse design spaces that can also be measured in terms of performance. So here, these buildings, we're measuring how well each window can see the sky, and we start to build a landscape on top of it for that. I'm also interested in design spaces that are procedurally generated, so following rules to create really, really diverse outcomes. Again, these are bridges I generated with a single program, pressing the random button 50 times when I was a student. And then more recently, thinking about similar rule-based ideas to aggregate material in intelligent ways so that we end up with really efficient but really surprising solutions that are expanding our palette for design. I'm also interested, as I said, in this idea of wild data. Here are 2 wild data sets that I'm fascinated with. Both are the results of design competitions. The top from the Tower of London competition in the late 1800s, where they were trying to build their own Eiffel Tower. The bottom, these jet engine brackets that users developed and submitted. What if we could project these into design spaces and find and explore the space between and start to understand these discrete ideas as part of a continuum? We're starting to do that with recent advances in learning representations for design. So this is an example where we can interpolate between 2 discrete design ideas. And then finally, I'm interested in how we can have more natural interactions with these machine learning and AI-based design spaces. Here, a user creates 2 sketches of design ideas. We use a predictive AI-based model to anticipate the score, to estimate the score, and then we can project these hand sketches into a computational design space and again start to explore the space between through things like interpolation. Last example I'll show you is one where we're thinking about text input, which is obviously a very hot topic. Here I'm thinking about what happens if we give a text input and a kind of structural optimization goal. Here I gave the goal of human skeletons, super spooky. The result is a building that is both optimally distributed in terms of material, but also looks like a human skeleton. This is ongoing work. We haven't published this yet, and I think it's still really confusing what this even means and how we're supposed to handle it. But I think it's really starting to speak to not necessarily replacing design, but designers, but having other ways that we can engage. Here's one more example from this that I love, Penrose tiling. I don't know if any of you know this, but it's this amazing pattern that the mathematician Roger Penrose came up with of these 2 quadrilaterals that can make these tiling patterns. We gave that the prompt to the same topology optimization. These are 2 of the results. This is my favorite one. I don't know if you can see the face in the upper right-hand corner. Any guesses who that is? That's Roger Penrose. So this also speaks to some of the limitations, right? That these models, this is using CLIP to do the text-based model. CLIP is not a very precise tool. So anyway, something to think about. To conclude, I'm really interested in how AI can collaborate not only with humans, but also enable interdisciplinary collaboration across humans. I think this is the key to creative and impactful design, is to cross boundaries and develop common understandings. And so I'd really advocate for not only new types of design, but really developing empathy in our algorithms so that they can understand our perspectives and we can understand theirs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. Woo, fantastic. From the architect to the artist.
So I'm delighted to be here. Really, it's an honor to be speaking on this panel and to be part of this event. I want to talk quickly about the group that I help lead here called Future Sketches. We are looking at the intersection of art, design, technology, specifically kind of what's in that middle. And one of the things that we advocate for are that the tools we make today inform the art we make tomorrow. And a lot of the work that we do is code-based, generative design, using language, using code, algorithms to make work. And they touch on different properties of machine learning. So for example, we're quite interested in how computation meets the world, using techniques like pose estimation to understand kind of where a body is, where a hand is, where a person is, and design computational systems that engage with people in different ways. Oftentimes taking something familiar, like the movement of your fingertips, and presenting something kind of unfamiliar. And we take the things that we learn as a group and we publish tools for other artists and designers. And I've been thinking a lot about this moment, and I think this moment is really interesting. This moment that we're in, the reason that we're having this conference, is it feels like the work is changing. Our jobs are changing. And if I think a lot about the work that means so much to me from the Media Lab, work like Muriel Cooper's visual language workshop, the information landscapes, or Peter Cho's work, they're about the movement from one form of publishing to another, the movement from maybe photo typesetting to desktop publishing, or the movement to the internet. To me, it feels like we're in one of those moments, and that's quite exciting, and I think the job and the way we work is changing. I want to share a few projects that we've been working on. This is a project called Landlines, which takes gesture as input. So this is using satellite photographs from around the world. And when you draw something, if you draw a curve, it finds a curve in some photograph in the world. If you draw a straight line, it finds a straight line. If you draw an angle, it finds an angle. And the idea is to kind of use, again, the familiar to connect you with the unfamiliar. And a lot of these projects are using forms of machine learning in one way or another, kind of working with large sets of data, thinking about dimensionality reduction, and then how can we use these in expressive and playful ways? So the second part of this project is connecting coastlines, like a highway or a coastline, a river. And as you drag, it's taking these satellite photographs from around the world and stitching them together to create a kind of infinite landscape. We were invited to create work for the National Museum of Taiwan History, and they were doing an exhibition which was a large collection of objects from their catalog, and they asked us to take these objects as input and design a set of animations. And so we used this large catalog of objects from Taiwan's history, and then used GAN animations and explored how we could kind of meditate in the latent space with these materials, and then explored different ways of manipulating them, of compositing them, of animating them, and created a series of animations that, as you're going through this exhibit, are kind of so you're seeing these objects and you're seeing the story of these objects, but it's also telling a story of the data and of the collection. So just a few clips of what this looked like. And I think there's a lot to explore with how these tools can allow us to have conversations with cultural heritage, with kind of large databases, how we can explore kind of, I guess you would say, information landscapes. As an artist, I'm quite interested in these tools. How can I use them in expressive ways? I think oftentimes we sort of stop at the output, that we kind of feed a prompt into one of these systems. I'm really interested in how can we create more kind of systems of dialogue with these machines, and use them and take the outputs and use that as our inputs and have more of a conversation. How can we explore the data space in different ways? This is an installation that we did at Coachella. We're installing, it's opening next week in Miami, exploring kind of similar properties. As a group, we're really interested in this space, and we think it's very important to listen to artists and designers. So we've been hosting a series of lunch lectures where we've had different practitioners and creators come in and talk about their practice. And I think, it's been super fun to experiment. I've been recently just experimenting with the LCM stuff, and it's wild. It's totally wild that you can take a camera as input and, see yourself as a frog. But I do think we need to explore how can we use these things in more nuanced ways. And so as I was kind of working with the webcam, I was thinking of these amazing Bruno Munari drawings of faces. And I think we need to explore not just the novelty of these algorithms, but how can we explore actually and maybe at a more fundamental level, how can we use these to see ourselves in a new way? I want to ask just a few questions. I don't have answers, but these are questions that I'm thinking about. How can we avoid cliche with these tools? I think that's just an insane quality of these tools, so they tend to lead to cliche. With my students, I think a lot about the notion of hype cycles, that there are these waves, right? There are these waves that come, right now there's a wave around generative AI. Maybe 5 years ago, there was a wave around augmented reality. These are amazing forces that are pushing in a certain direction. But I feel like as an artist or a designer, you need to be almost like sailing, the wind is pushing you in one direction, but you want to go in maybe a slightly different direction. So how can we use that force in a positive way? How can we use these as part of a holistic practice? And then one thing I'm really worried about is, these tools have been trained on visual culture, on language. What happens when these tools are trained on the output of these tools, right? To me, that's just, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm really kind of curious and worried. And then the last thing is, just fundamentally, what should we be worried about and what should we be excited about? And I was thinking a lot about it this week, or last week. There was so much happening around OpenAI, and I can't remember these names, effective altruism and effective accelerationism. And I feel like a lot of times these are almost misdirections, that there are actual real problems. There are real things we should be worried about beyond a kind of a notion of doom, but actually, what are the biases? What are the harms that these tools could create? But also, what are the potential? And that's why I'm so excited to be here and be a part of this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Michael and Caroline, can't wait to hear what you have to say.
So, thank you for inviting us. So I'm Michael Runawolf, and I am Lakota, Cheyenne, and Blackfeet, and a little bit of British princess, which is actually true. I totally love tea, Earl Grey specifically. And I am a teepee Native American, the stereotype. I grew up on the prairie. Like Dawa said, I grew up in rural Montana, and cowboy boots are where they come from. And this is the largest teepee encampment in the world, which is in Montana. And what is it, Caroline?
Well, it's actually my family's camp at our biggest celebration, Crow Fair, third weekend in August. If you're in Montana and around that time, go check it out. It's a lot of fun, powwows. So dancing, singing, rodeo, horse racing, everything. And this is my family's camp. And I'm also kind of the stereotypical feather Indian, but also not, as Dava mentioned. Kind of grew up all over the place.
Yeah, and so what we're going to talk about is for the past, since we've known each other, for a while now, we're married, if you can't tell, is building technology that's community accessible, that enriches but also coexists and collaborates with existing knowledge systems within indigenous cultures. And specifically, we started out, and I love this picture, and if I ever give a presentation, I'll always be showing this picture, because just naturally, immersive technology, this is an augmented reality app that we built early on, it just creates community. Like these two little girls who didn't know each other, the little Blackfeet girl and another one from Missoula, Montana, just loved the engagement, and they were teaching each other how to work with it, and it creates these natural connections. And then we can use that power to create community using technology, and particularly technology that works for Indigenous communities. And also making sure that we're building the next generation. We do have a problem within Native America where we don't have very many technologists. Like you're looking at we are one of 12 in the world.
We are one.
We are two, okay, sorry. There's 2 of 12 AI researchers in North America. There's just very few of us. We only produce 1 or 2 PhD students per year in computer science, and very few of those are actually AI researchers. And so we wanted to try to build technology that uplifts and goes into communities. And one output of our project is educating the community. Like here, this is an alumni Mason Grimshaw and a couple of our students where we're teaching them practical artificial intelligence and hoping to inspire them to pursue higher education, like institutions like MIT and others.
Just real quick, those images were from the Lakota AI Code Camp, an initiative that we've had 2 summers now.
Yeah. And long term, this will be integrated within our larger AI research, which is what? So what you're looking at here is a map of North American language diversity. And the largest language family in North America is the Algonquin, which stretches from the mountain west in Montana, going up into Alberta, and spans all the way to here with the Wampanoag and other communities, Abenaki, and which includes my mother's language, Cheyenne. And it has hundreds of languages. It's the largest, most diverse language family in North America. But as you can see, there's a lot. There's dozens and dozens of language families that have at least a handful of languages, 6 or 7 languages, up to hundreds, like the Algonquin language. And as you can also see, there's the color white. That's where Indigenous languages no longer exist. So what you're seeing here is a picture of manifest destiny. As the colonization spread west, diversity increases, and so the highest diversity of languages exists on the West Coast. And this is also where we're focusing our research, where we're trying to solve key problems here, as you can see here. So basically, the summary of what we're working on is we don't have enough data, we don't have enough speakers, we also have non-European morphology, so traditional ML strategies, machine learning strategies don't work for these languages, and also wrap it up in a way that uses XR, virtual reality, augmented reality, so that it works on the communities, and also accounts for the fact that Native communities don't have the greatest internet. Native communities don't have high technical resources, so we often have to bring in the expertise and train them. We don't want to be the bottleneck. We don't want to contain this research within an ivory tower, and making sure that the community actually are our research partners. They're not research subjects. They're a very important key on that. You want anything to add?
Just go on.
Yeah, and these are the communities we're working with.
Right. So we're working with the Kwakwaka'wakw people up on North Vancouver Island in Canada, and they speak variations of Kwakwala, and that's part of the so-called Wakashan language family, which is why we also roped in the Makah Nation in Washington State on the tip of Olympic Peninsula. And because they're the same language family. And then we basically got hunted down by a Gwich'in elder from the Arctic who really loves the work that we're doing and wants to be part of it, and convinced us that he should be part of the starting 3 languages that we're working with. And who's we? That's the team that you can see right there. Already met Michael and me. Then we have Sean Sosi, who's Navajo and Little Shell and has a PhD in math from, he's an alum from MIT. And we have our
Tame linguist.
Our tame linguist, Connor McDonald Quinn, who's Irish American, I think. And then Andrea Delgado Olsen, who's Northern Sierra Miwok and the ED for our newly founded nonprofit, Indigenious.
Yeah, and so much of the research is housed at the Mueller AI Institute, which is a research lab founded by Yossua Bengio, and this is our intern. So we have interns from here. We have Faith Baca and Ryan Conti, who are MIT, actually working on their undergraduate right now, and then also Kyron and Dane, who are from Stanford and McGill. So we are working to uplift the next generation and inspire our next generation. And there's our team linguist, Connor Quinn, and there's a face there. And real quickly, this is our QR code if you're interested in the research. And I think we're ready.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Let's leave this up. Wonderful. Thanks to everyone. And all right, we'll have lots of questions, and we'll have time for some audience questions as well. Caitlin, let's question, and how might we combine, human and AI systems, specifically to, make more creative, better decisions? You showed some examples, but you can maybe expand on that a little bit. It's always about human and our machines and systems.
Yeah, I think the first part is just centering that point that I think it's extremely unlikely that we will attain better solutions in the spaces where humans matter, buildings, culture, art, only through algorithmic means. I think humans are intrinsic to not only contributing to the designs, but also they're the people who experience them. I mean, the other side of it is, in some ways, the purpose of art and creative expression is pleasure. So why would we take that away from ourselves? So I think just keeping that point centered is really important, because there tends to be an interest in automation, right? To make things faster and more efficient. It would be better if we could design all these buildings automatically, so we could design cities in minutes, and we wouldn't have to spend so much money on et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm empathetic to that perspective, because I agree in some ways our needs are so great that automation is really powerful. But I think these tools are more amazing when we incorporate the perspectives of humans. First of all, because they come up with more diverse ideas. If we're constantly kind of searching for the same answer and over and over and over, we're just going to keep finding the same thing. But humans are so idiosyncratic and so quirky that they add something really fresh to these processes that I think I truly believe the result is better than what we would have found with either.
Yeah, absolutely. And Zach, I'm going to turn to you after the first Gen AI work that I did here in the Media Lab with students was kind of at the brainstorming stage. And we had everyone, it's really hard to know people's mental models. What's inside there? What's inside that brain? So we used some Gen AI and you looked at it, and we had real reactions. Some people, oh yeah, you captured what I was thinking. Other people, no, that doesn't capture it at all. And so it was kind of unlocking creativity for us. And I know that's, familiar to your work.
Yeah, and I would say that these tools are really great for conversation. Some of the most interesting things that I've seen in the Media Lab are projects that are using these tools to facilitate conversation and storytelling and brainstorming. And I think this is a super interesting space.
But what has surprised you? You want people to be surprised.
Yeah,
what surprised you?
You know what has surprised me is the pace, right? Just the sort of unrelenting pace of. It feels like every week, every day, there's a new paper being published. There's a new model. It's been really phenomenal to see, as maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I saw these kind of blurry images. They look like postage stamps, and you kind of like, if you squinted at them hard enough, you could see what they could become. But now those images are getting larger and more in focus and sharper and looking like photographs. And, it's that progression, the pace of the progression has really surprised me. I think it's surprised a lot of people.
Exactly. Thank you. And Michael and Caroline, I want to turn to you. And such important work, and I just want to leave it open a little bit more to how can we envision, explore, how do we implement this, more of the joyful, meaningful, inspirational aspects of your work. You're doing hard work, but it's so impactful, and you're lifting everyone up. And we want to know how we can be part of that journey with you to inspire and explore and lift people up.
I'll go real quickly. Let Caroline go. The boss. We need partners. I think obviously we need funds, but really what we need is friends and allies. Like we Indigenous communities have a lot of systemic problems. We need better internet. You know, we live in rural Montana, and as you know, it's really hard to get internet for out there for Indigenous communities, and we need technical partners. We don't have the talent base. There's probably only like hundreds of us in all of the United States and North America who have the technical skill to actually pursue this. And so we need friends and allies to help us and also empower us so that we gain agency over advanced technologies like AI and generative AI. Caroline?
Okay, I'm just going to shift to the envision and the future and talk a little bit about the vision that we have and what's driving us is that technical possibility that exists today already of, virtual reality. You put on the headset, you immerse yourself in a totally different place or a different time. Maybe you are something different from what you are today or someone different from who you are today. And those technical possibilities are already really great for, I would say, just for our creativity, for our humanity as such, right? But for Indigenous people, we don't see ourselves there. And why? Because we're not represented in that. And so what we're doing with our work is, and where we're going, the R and flair, the realities, is to be able to put on those AI-powered glasses and walk around in Boston and be able to hear the actual local Indigenous language, be able to learn about the history of the place, and not just, boring history as in this is when the colonization happened. No, the actual history of this is the, sorry, there's no mountains here. I was going to say this is the name of this mountain, and here's the story why this mountain has that name, and what we can learn from that story, and kind of just immersing yourself in your environment that you're in, opening up layers that you don't actually see now, because what you see now is, sorry, Caitlin, just the buildings, right?
So let's, it's so important. You have so much to teach us. We're listening tens of thousands of years of culture and history and knowing and wisdom. So I hope all of us have our ears open. We're looking for partnerships, all that inspiration. I think is as important as saving humanity, saving ourselves on the planet. Where do we come from? Please, I'm going to go back now in this. We're going to go back in this order now, and you get to ask each other questions as well, because this is a real, interactive panel. Zach mentioned, a little bit of what keeps him up at night. Some of the worries, but I'm going to ask you what also you find maybe the most hopeful, if we can focus on imagining ourselves and our histories and our cultures and kind of unlocking future potential. So Kelly, starting with you, to what's a surprise, but share a beautiful moment of your Lakota students that, they just come, they're in VR, AR, they're coding with you, and maybe they're seeing a different future for themselves.
There's so many beautiful moments that we had. We just had 2 camps, right? The first one was 2 summers ago. And during those 3 weeks, our youngest student was a 13-year-old girl. She was our best coder, right? We had 3 students that were getting ready to graduate from high school, and they weren't really seeing themselves in college. And by the end of the camp, they said, this is great, and we're going to apply for college, and we want to do something along these lines. They came back last summer as teaching assistants, and we're hoping they're going to come back next summer as FLAIR interns. And yeah, and then just, totally non-technology related, when we went out into the field, maybe you want to, we went out into the field with Linda Black Elk, who taught them all about the indigenous plants that are all around us. And I don't know, I'd have to bleep myself, I guess. One of the kids exclaimed, "Holy bleep, there's medicine everywhere." And that was just wonderful to bring it all together.
And just real quickly, I think there's sort of this myth emerging within indigenous communities that we don't have the ability to participate in technology because of all these systemic barriers, and also this view that there's virtually no path, like no hope that we're going to do this. And then seeing the kids be inspired by, we brought in engineers who are Native American in corporations like Salesforce and Meta and Amazon engineers, and they gave a little bit of talk over Zoom to them, and they actually saw it. And they're teenagers. You look at them, they look like slack-faced blank stare. But then you can hear them talking amongst themselves of like, "Oh, that's cool. I can go work for Salesforce. I didn't know that existed. I can work for Amazon, or I can work at Facebook, or help to develop the Facebook app." And just seeing that spark. And it's uplifting on one hand, but also there's the yin to the yang, and that it also means that there's a lot of little brown girls out there who are just not getting the opportunity. And this is what I mean, that we need allies. We need to scale, and we need help. There's not enough of us who can do this, so we definitely need friends to help us spread this skill.
Thank you. Zach, I would go back to one of the points you mentioned on too, and it is those worries. So looking at both sides of the coin. We have to, when we teach kids or have our open AI days, we say, here's what it can be used for good, and here's some real nefarious. Here's some things you need to worry about. And kids are all smart, right?
Yeah.
And so having that conversation, how does that affect your work? And love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think literacy, kind of talking about the tools, understanding what they are, what they feel like, what are the boundaries of these tools, but also what are the problems, what are the issues. I think that's a conversation like anytime I think there's so many positive things that we can talk about, but that conversation needs to be woven in.
That real conversation.
Yeah, it needs to be part of the dialogue, for sure. I think that's fundamental. And I think I'm so proud of a lot of the work at the Media Lab, other researchers at the Media Lab, Algorithmic Justice League, folks like that. Like, there are people here doing amazing work, telling the story of, what we should be looking out for with these tools.
Yeah, because it has to work for all. It has to work for all. If it doesn't work for all, then we shouldn't be using. We need to lift that up by, with, and for all, and calling that out. Because we don't have the training data of Native Americans. We don't have the training data of women. We don't have the training data of blacks, brown folks. So that's not okay. We're going to call out those biases, but I think we can get it right.
And I just want to share one moment of surprise that happened yesterday, because I noticed Cohen Deep's in the audience today, where he came to it's kind of like hanging out in our group yesterday and was like, "Oh, let me show you this demo." And he has this demo called Gas Me Up. And it takes a webcam photograph. It took a photograph of me, and then it generated like a really affirmational prompt, like an affirmational text, and then read it back to me and said, "Your cap is stylish and sets you apart." And, it was like, it was so like, it really like made my day. Like, it was, and I think there's like really beautiful moments like that that we should celebrate.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Caitlin, I'm going to go back to your work and tools and kind of your dreams, if you will, for your students, but more, broader for the world, kind of putting these tools in people's hands, and especially even for lifelong learning, right? It's so important. And I know that we think we've done well at MIT if we can scale and then we can give access to the world. What are your dreams?
Yeah, well, what I found so far in my own work and in my teaching and work with students and others is it's a lot more fun when you're really getting your hands dirty. And the idea of the tool as this kind of pristine, finalized thing that you just sort of buy as a commodity and use is not very interesting to me, and I think probably not to a lot of people for all of the reasons we've discussed, the sort of monocultural perspective and the inability to hack. And so to me, and I'm very worried, I think, like as all of us are, about these large models that are impenetrable, that we can't compete, we don't have the compute, we don't have the data, we don't understand what's going into them. This idea that the future is just all of us using these models and creating consumer products based on them is, like, pretty unsettling to me. So my vision for the future, and I hope, those of you who are working on sort of the fundamentals of developing these technologies are thinking about this too, is how do we continue to hack and work with and inject our own ideas and reflect our own cultural perspectives in these systems? It's really, really important that they can be customized and used in really unexpected and misused and really played with flexibly. And I think sometimes there's this sense, especially in maybe the commercial sector, that everyone just wants something super slick and easy to use that just does one thing really obviously. But I think they'll be much more interesting if we can get inside and play with them more. And so my dream would be to create sort of not only tools, but methods and ways of thinking that are open and flexible, and that can really align with very, very diverse perspectives and ways of understanding the world.
We are in the Media Lab, and play is in our DNA, and making, and also, thriving, and we have to enjoy. I love that you just had a nice experience exactly the other day, the enjoyment and the doing the serious work, but also, because that's how we benefit, right? We're uplifting ourselves and all people. It always starts with people. It's always for people. And what about play? Because we do have a group, Lifelong Kindergarten. And maybe everything we ever needed to know, we learned in kindergarten. So I want to open it up to the audience now, for you to take advantage of our amazing panel and perhaps ask a question that we haven't gotten to. What's on your minds? Anyone? Good, I have a hand raised. If you could come up to the mic, that would be great, just so we're being streamed and so that all the audience can hear you live and remote. And please introduce yourself. Welcome.
Thank you. This is a wonderful series of talks from all your experts. I have this overriding concern. We've been talking about children, our future generation, in the future. We've already seen there's been extensive research that's come out about how technology can negatively impact the growing minds of children, and seeing as now we are in an unstoppable AI era, how and the kind of tools and technologies that we design today is pretty much going to drive the future generation and how they live. So I don't know the specific question to ask. I'm just stating my concern.
But we hear your concern, and well, let's talk about that. What do we exactly, Michael? What agency do we have? What can we do about this?
Hunter, I really appreciate the question. I think there's a nuance here in that I understand there's educational impacts of a technology, but there's also, it's positive and negative, though. It's always in balance, for good or bad. And like for us, why XR? Why virtual reality? This is an expensive investment. We could be doing something else like just mobile apps, right? Mobile apps don't actually work very well for language education. There's extensive research coming out of MIT, Stanford, the usual suspects, where XR is highly effective at teaching languages, even just something as silly as doing flashcards, which is the least effective way to learn a language. Doing that in virtual reality is very useful. You have higher retention. There's something going on when you introduce it. And you have to apply it well, because the flip of that, of course, is that you could potentially give someone PTSD with a really engaging horror VR experience. And so where the intersection of AI is that we want the headset in a culturally contextualized situation for the language, like for Makah, Kwakwala, where they would go on a canoe journey and speak their language, and that's where the ASR comes in, and then the XR component, it amplifies the educational aspect in a culturally sensitive situation where we're developing with the community.
Yeah, basically just give the opportunity to apply the language while you're immersed in your culture and applying it in that cultural context, and not just sitting in a classroom memorizing individual words, but having that opportunity to converse in the language. And so that's our goal. But, you know, to your question about, I would say, the general ethics, right? I feel a big part of it is education, and I know that was like 2 days ago, the emphasis of the series here, but I think for education professionals right now, there's that task of quickly adjusting to this new challenge of AI. And as Zach mentioned earlier, we have to interweave the ethics aspects of it. Like if we say, okay, we're just going to slap this ethics section at the very end of the semester into the coursework, that's the one that's going to be dropped. That's the one that's not going to actually happen, and where people are going to just tune out. But we have to interweave it the whole time. And that's what we were doing at the Code Camp too, was just kind of going back to the plants, for example. We came across a highly poisonous plant that was growing right next to an edible carrot-related plant, and they happened to look very much alike. And so we used that opportunity to show the students, these are the two plants. This is how you can identify one versus the other. And you know, you have to know this, and don't even go near it, don't touch it, because it's that poisonous. And then afterwards, when we were categorizing the data, the photos that we took, the students started discussing amongst themselves, and we supported that discussion, that is it ethical to show either of these as a potential plant identification if there's a chance that the AI is going to say, oh yeah, this is the edible carrot, go ahead, make a tea, or should we maybe just not identify any of these plants because the risk is too high, right? So, long way of saying, a lot of it is education on all levels. And then a big part of it is really thinking about the ethics and the long-term impact, and also considering saying no and not doing something because it's too risky.
Zach, I see you shaking your
yeah.
head.
No, I'm just
you know,
saying.
weaving in the kind of the ethics into the teaching, into just the narrative to kind of every class or every session. Do you try to weave that into your teaching?
Yeah, and I think one thing that I am a strong advocate here for at the lab is I think it's important for artists and designers to be working with new technologies to explore the boundaries and see what's possible, and to be able to even to think critically about them or express critical perspectives. And I try to encourage students about the difference between demo and poem, and that a demo is a kind of demonstration of technology that you're saying, like, I'm excited about this thing and I'm gonna make something to show this thing off. And a poem is something where the technology is in service of an idea or in service of a vision. And I try to promote poetry over demos, and I think that's one thing. I just generally think it's important for artists and designers to be in the space, to be experimenting, but also because they're providing a perspective that's different from companies, that's different from governments, that's different from organizations, and it's that kind of those perspectives that can lead to really interesting and nuanced conversations that I think is important.
Fantastic. I think we have another question here.
Yeah, thank you. My question comes from perspective of say a performing musician that I am, and happen to be very analog. There was something that I caught in Rodney Brooks's keynote about, there's a lot of discussion we'll have about what this stuff does, but then there's also conversations about what does it mean. And I bring the perspective that creativity has fundamentally been a channel for us to express things about our humanity, things that are in some ways maybe ineffable and hard to grasp. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how these tools might relate to that creative impulse, that if we're coming from a space of creativity that's about expressing our just core humanity, what do these tools say? What do they mean?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Caitlin. Maybe I'll have you start if you don't mind.
Wonderful.
It's a big question, expressing our humanity, but you're right on.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right on. That's a super important question that I think all of us it's at the top of all of our minds, or it should be if it's not. I don't know the answer to this, but I will give my thoughts at least. To me, what I find most exciting about developing and using these methods is expanding my own capabilities, having ideas that I would not have come up with by myself, and yet am so stimulated by and am so excited by them. And so I think that stimulation and that excitement is my humanity, my ability to judge and guide and perceive and code is how I'm expressing my humanity. Just one layer back then from literally sculpting an object. I'm sculpting this space, or I'm sculpting the algorithm through which I move through the space on a particular path. And so for me, it's an extremely human endeavor. It's very emotional. It's very I'm super excited when I'm doing it, and hopefully others are too who are working in this area. So I'm never really concerned in my own work about losing humanity, because I'm just like I'm so happy when I'm doing it. I feel most human in some ways when I'm working in these ways. I think the danger is when maybe it's less exciting and we're less invested, and becomes more rote, and we replace a musical performance with like an AI generated jingle. Like that's it's horrible. That's the opposite of I think what you're getting at. And so again, I think the key is really being intentional about what we're using these for. Why are we generating these things? I think, to me, that one of the opportunities is to move beyond what we can do by ourselves, but in a direction that we're giving. I think otherwise, it's very questionable, as I think you're implying.
Yeah, I think that human augmentation, you're living in the space, you're augmenting your capabilities and even making it even better. Any of the others want to reply to the question? Please, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, just an anecdote. I had a project that I installed. It was a project called Expression Mirror, which is an interactive work where you kind of emote with your face. You look, you sort of make an expression, like you smile or look angry or surprised, and it finds photographs of other people who interacted, and so you're seeing yourself kind of through other people's expressions. And so I was very proud of this work, and I set it up at the Cooper Hewitt, and they had a event where the board came through, and somebody on the board was like, what is the purpose of this? Like, what is this? What is this for? And I remember just stammering. I couldn't come up with an answer, and then I got online and I tweeted I felt so bad I couldn't answer. And so I asked the community, and somebody said something that I think is really beautiful, which is art is there to help you feel an idea, right? That creating and making is about feeling an idea. And I think that's, I don't know if that is an answer to your question, but as you were asking the question, I was just thinking of this notion of making and creating to help feel an idea. And I think a lot of what we're doing here is trying to feel what's in this space.
Michael and Caroline, do you hope in terms of enhancing the human experience in your work?
I'll just be super short, so we should have more questions. But no, I think I agree. I think creating AI is an act of artistry. And like a lot of art, sometimes it's just junk. So sometimes it's good and bad. So.
Please, yep, there's another question. Go ahead.
Just to comment on this last point, I think you're absolutely right that before we have any concrete ideas, we have art, we have literature. That's at least how I'm inspired to think about the future. I'm going to ask a few questions on behalf of my partner, who isn't here right now, but she's interested in the integration of indigenous science and Western science, in particular in creating solutions for climate change and for technology. She wanted to ask how you envision the integration of indigenous wisdom and traditional values happening in AI at scale. How can you see that process is actually happening, and what are the risks? And how can we ensure protections for indigenous communities along the way?
Do you want to start?
Yeah, I think the short TLDR is that we need to have the agency of the technology and the means of production to create this technology, so that, because we only ourselves, our individual communities, can ensure that their data is being protected. And what I mean by that, it's not sufficient that there's a Native American in charge of AI. It needs to be an individual communities in charge of their own AI. I am Lakota and Cheyenne, and I'm an alien to the local Wampanoag. I am an alien to a foreigner to the Waukesha and Kwakwala languages, and we are very careful in being respectful in that. What is it that they want out of AI? And a lot of our technical objectives are built around their needs and a lot of consultation. I'm a former software engineer, and that's just basically knowing your customer, right? And so, and what's also important is that we're working on these code camps where we're teaching the kids, and we want them to own it. I don't want to be the bottleneck, the figurehead of this movement. I want my hope is there's a little brown girl out there who's smarter than this. It definitely is. My worry is that there's a little brown girl, Lakota girl, or Kwakwala girl, or even Abzaliga, who's going to advance the science to the next level, or AGI, whatever it is we're chasing right now. But we're not going to be fast enough to get in front of her and give her the opportunity and give her the chance to actually do that. And so I think that we're just wasting a lot of talent out there by not being in the schools, in the communities, making sure that they're being given agency. But to your other points, I think Caroline's better answer, the cultural context.
I'm just going to throw a few things out there, because you were saying, the wisdom. Yes, there's a lot of wisdom. There's a lot of traditional knowledge, but some of that knowledge, some of that wisdom isn't meant for outsiders. And Michael and I would be outsiders too. And so the way we have to think about this is really emphasizing indigenous data sovereignty, indigenous data governance, and like Michael said, find ways of empowering the communities to use those tools as they see fit, and to share what they want to share with the general public, outsiders like us. And I'd love to talk more.
Yeah. So that is a fantastic last word, fantastic questions. Thank you for engaging. And I want to really thank you all. It's been a pleasure. This is the start of the conversation. So thank you very much.